This is Keys to the Shop, episode 292, How to Take Charge and Drive Your Career with Ed Evarts. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFerio. I'm your host for the show, and as always, I'm really delighted that you're here, and I really hope that you're subscribed to Keys to the Shop. Now, if you're not, I would encourage you to do so. We come out with a lot of episodes every month, and if you want to be updated with new content, that is the way to do it. Just hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll be set up. Now, I'd love it if you'd share these episodes with a friend or your team. If you love what we do and what Keys to the Shop has to offer, if this show has helped you in any way, I would really be appreciative if you'd leave a 5-star rating or review over at Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show in the rankings, helps more people find it. Just all around good stuff happens when you rate or review Keys to the Shop. So thank you very much. Now, Keys to the Shop, on top of doing this podcast, also offers consulting and coaching for you and your business. If you're looking to level up your operations, your people, your quality, or you want to get started on the right foot with a new coffee business, Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you in a lot of different ways, whether that's remotely over the phone or in person with cafe assessments and training. If you want to schedule a free 30-minute discovery call with me, then just reach out to me via email. That is chris@keystotheshop.com. I look forward to talking with you and seeing how I might be able to help you build a thriving coffee business. Again, the email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Now, Prima Coffee is one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers because they not only curate a great list of the world's best equipment, but they also work hard to make sure that you're getting the right equipment for your situation and on making you successful in coffee. And now, as a Keys to the Shop listener, you can get 5% off your entire order when you use the code KEYS5 at checkout over at prima-coffee.com/keys. Again, that's KEYS5. That's KEYS, the number 5, and it gives you 5% off your entire order. So it's a really generous offer from a group of people who want nothing more to equip you with great equipment and the knowledge to succeed in specialty coffee. So if you're in the market for great commercial coffee equipment and you want to work with the best, go check them out over at prima-coffee.com/keys. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Barista Series from Pacific. The Barista Series is, no surprise, the barista's number one choice for plant-based performance beverages because Pacific has designed these specifically with the barista in mind and the most discerning plant-based customers. Anything you choose from their extensive lineup at the Barista Series will perform on bar to give you an amazing texture for latte art on every drink and also keep the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee. This stuff is tested by some of the world's best baristas before it even goes into production, so you can have confidence that your customers are going to get the highest level when you carry the Barista Series in your shop. Just go to their website, pacificfoodservice.com, for more information. And again, if you're looking to serve your customers the best, then I highly recommend your cafe serves the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm excited today to talk about your career. And the question really is, who is driving your career? A lot of the times we attribute the state of our career right now to outside forces, to, fate. It takes a long time for us to kind of think maybe it's something that I can affect a little bit more. And I've certainly been in that position. And as I get older, I think back, I'm like, man, I could have done a little bit more to take initiative early on in my career. So I find myself talking about this often with young baristas, as the old man barista. But the goal here is to learn how to take charge and really take the wheel and drive success in our careers. To help us do that today, we are talking with the author of the new book, Drive Your Career: 9 High-Impact Ways to Take Responsibility for Your Own Success. That man is Ed Evarts. Ed Evarts is the founder and president of Excellius Leadership Development, which is a Boston-based coaching organization, and he works with successful leaders to increase their self-awareness so they can manage themselves more productively. He works with successful teams to ensure their time together is as productive as possible. And he works with smaller organizations at different pivot points in their evolution to help them plan strategically and purposefully for the future. Now, on top of this new book, Drive Your Career, which is the subject of our interview today, Ed is also the author of Raise Your Visibility and Value, and How to Uncover the Lost Art of Connecting on the Job. And he's the host of the Be Brave at Work podcast, which is a weekly podcast where leaders share their stories about bravery or their lack of bravery in their careers and the impact that their choices have had on their career progression. And so today we're talking with Ed, covering subjects about how to have a good relationship with your boss, writing yourself back into the equation of influence on your own career, the importance of feedback, empathy, curiosity. I mean, what bell curves have to do with your career. There's a lot of great content here. If you are looking to have a career in coffee, if you're a coffee shop owner, manager, trainer, I don't care who you are, if you just want to do better with where you are now, this is going to be a great conversation. So without anything more, let's get right to the interview. Here now is my talk with the author of Drive Your Career, Ed Evarts. Well, Ed, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Really glad to have you on the show. How's it going today?
It's going great, Chris. Thank you for having me as your guest.
Absolutely. I mean, this is such a critical topic. And I think especially now that everyone's been granted some kind of a time to consider not only their business, if they're a business owner, but just their career. You're either looking for a new one or you're thinking about ways to maximize the one you have and get ahead. And your book does such a great job helping people distill down what the main things that they need to be doing are. So I'm curious about, in the process of writing this book, these are obviously things that you've seen work for yourself and other people that you've worked with. I mean, how did you come to write this book and distill it down to these 9 things?
When I wrote my first book, which is called Raise Your Visibility and Value, that was really a reflection on my prior 25 years in corporate America. And when I transitioned to be an independent leadership coach in 2008, after about 13 or 14 years, I started to notice that there were certain stories or anecdotes or perspectives that I repeatedly shared with clients, regardless of their status. They could be a president of a company, a supervisor, or somewhere in between. But these stories kept coming up again and again and again. I didn't bring them up purposely. It was just a reflection of what we were talking about as a client consultant. And so I think I had one of those shower moments where I said, I need to pay attention to what these stories are because I keep repeating them. And if they apply to all these different types of people, perhaps they can apply to others. And so I paid attention to the stories that came up on a repeated basis. And there happened to be 9 that, magically came up again and again and again, and hence the book, Drive Your Career.
I love it when there are stories that are behind these things because it's not just an idea, it's something that actually happened and worked for somebody, and apparently for a lot of people to make it into your book. What would you say is the main reason why people think they can't get ahead? Contrast what they have in their head versus actually what it is.
Yeah, and I'm not a sociologist or psychologist, so, I would tell you that it just seems as though, and this is a reflection of myself as well, but it seems as though we are going along for the ride, right? We land a great job or we work at a great company, or maybe not, but we tend to get up every day and try to be the best person that we can be and do the best work that we can be. And time goes by quickly. And so suddenly 1, 2, 3, 5 years have gone by. And one day I ask myself, why am I here? What am I doing? How did I get here? Do I like this? Etc. And, I believe, Chris, that most of those people are passengers. They're just going along for the ride. Hopefully the ride is rewarding, both financially and personally. But, at some point they will stop and ask those questions of themselves. And so the stories that I've crafted and the experiences that I've had as a leadership coach have been really designed to help people transition from being a passenger in their career to being more of a driver. And these are the type of people who are always ensuring that whatever direction they go, whatever job they accept, wherever they tend to move professionally, that they're going in a direction they want to go. So they never have to ask themselves the question, how did I get here? Or what am I doing? Or why am I here?
Oh man, I've asked that so many times in my career.
Sure, we all have.
And it feels like a bit of the phenomenon of learned helplessness, where we just kind of, what is will always be, and I might as well not try, just get comfortable in the state that I'm in. So it takes a bit to kind of break that cycle, I guess.
Well, most workplaces today are very fast-paced. They change very quickly. There was a time where change did not happen that often, and in fact, the business model was, hey, here's what we do. We're really good at it. We're never going to change. And today, I think and probably most of our listeners know, that if you're not changing on a regular basis, you're going to get left behind. So you need to keep figuring out what to do next. But all of this change and all of this fast-pacedness focuses people on the day-to-day activities that they have to work on, projects and clients and relationships and conference calls and meetings and so forth and so on. And we don't have enough time to pause and say, hey, hold on, wait a minute. Is this working for me? Do I like this? Is this what I want to be doing? So I believe one of the causes of people being put in the passenger seat is the culture and activity of their workplace, that it is so fast-paced, they don't have time to pause and think about themselves.
Yeah, I think Michael Gerber, who wrote the book, the E-Myth Revisited, said it like just doing it, and you just keep doing it, and the momentum just imprisons you until you have to, like you say, I mean, maybe it reaches a critical point where you just like throw your hands up in the air and say, I have to stop, or I'm gonna lose it. And so having these outlined the way you have in the book, these 9 things, helps us figure out if we do get a time where we can pause long enough to think about our careers. Just to start off the talk about what's in the book, you start off with something that's kind of, I don't think it's contentious to everybody, but for a lot of people, their boss is the thing that's holding them back. But the first thing about getting ahead in your career is to have a positive relationship with your boss. So seeing as how this is something people don't see themselves as having that much control over, we write ourselves out of the equation when it comes to having a good relationship with our boss. But how do we kind of put ourselves back into that equation and actually create a good relationship?
Well, in the book, I share a few ideas on things people can do in order to ensure that they have a positive relationship with their boss. I'm not suggesting you're best friends and that you go out to dinner every night and share war stories, but you need to ensure that your boss thinks highly of you. And this, I think, Chris, is another example of our fast-paced workplaces, that this is not an area that a lot of people spend a lot of time in. They certainly want to be polite and have great relationships with people, but they don't pause to say, you know what, I want to ensure that my boss is specifically somebody who feels very, very good about me. And this is a great example of a story that came up again and again and again over the last 14 years. And I would say 85% of the people that I have worked with over the last 14 years wish they had a better relationship with their boss. It wasn't always that they had a bad relationship, and some did have bad relationships with their boss, which is not helpful. But these were all people who thought that it could be better, that if the president of the company was in the elevator with their boss and said, hey, tell me about Chris, how's he doing? They weren't sure what would be said. I started with that chapter, and they're not in order of importance. All 9 stories affect different people in different ways, but this was one that I thought would be good to start with because it's so important that you pause, and to be a driver of your career, that you're doing very specific things to ensure that you have a positive relationship with your boss.
Right. So one of the things you talked about was being a helper, being seen as a helper. And a lot of us would say, well, if I'm doing what my job description says, then I'm helping. I can see how that might not exactly be the case. So tell us a little bit about what a helper is and how we go about creating that reality.
So I'm also a former HR leader, and I would tell you that most job descriptions are written in a way that, only the most perfect person in the world could ever do everything in the job description that's listed, right? We put everything in to make it sound like here's everything that we need. And of course, nobody can fit that well. So I'm just making that observation that people don't think, hey, if I'm doing my job description, I must have a great relationship with my boss. But, you need to ensure that and some of this takes bravery, Chris, to have a conversation with your boss. And one of the tips that I would provide our listeners is to have a conversation with your boss where you ask them, and maybe you do it over coffee or at lunch, tell me a little bit about what your goals and aspirations are. What are you looking to achieve in your career? Where do you want to go professionally? Because I want to help you, right? I mean, most bosses believe and want all the people that report up to them to be helping them. And I don't mean selfishly, like helping me, but if I'm successful as the head of sales or the head of marketing or the head of legal, everyone will be successful, right? It's good news for everyone. So let's all be working together to help that happen. And so I would encourage all of your leaders, all of our listeners, to do two things. One, reflect a little bit on how do they see the relationship with their boss. And if you're rated on a scale of 1 to 6 and you're a 1, 2, or 3, maybe a 4, you probably have some work to do. And then the first thing that you could do is find time to be curious about what is important to your boss. How can you help them achieve whatever it is that they're looking to achieve?
They have dreams and aspirations, the boss does. And so you figure out like what those are and how it's in your power in your work to create or to help that happen for them. And the hope is that they'll see you and they'll see you, accomplish that. Now, if people have bosses that are a little bit more detached and not so engaged, is there a way for us to be engaged with our bosses? And maybe it's a managing up issue of saying, if you have a boss that's not going to recognize anything you do, how do you go about having a good relationship with somebody who doesn't reciprocate?
Every time I do a presentation on this topic, Chris, somebody always raises their hand and says, I have a boss who will never participate in any of this. They're impossible to work for. We don't get along at all. And, there is no magic solution. So I'm not suggesting that the recommendations I make in the book are going to work on every boss, right? You might just find yourself in a situation where you work for somebody whose self-awareness or emotional intelligence or ability to show empathy are so low that it's going to be impossible to have a great working relationship with them. And at that point, you have a choice. I mean, I do believe life is about choices, and your choice is either to do the best you can do in that situation. Another chapter of the book is called Play the Hand You've Been Dealt. And if you've been dealt a bad hand, then you got to play it. Or you move on and say, you know what, as a driver of my career, I need to work for somebody who's going to inspire me and motivate me and challenge me, and that's not going to happen here. So over the next couple of years, I'm going to find a new opportunity. It might be within your own company, or it might be elsewhere, right? So, these are all choices that people need to make. But I do recognize that there are a percentage of bosses out there who should not be bosses and have behaviors and experiences with others that are significantly negative.
Would you say that even in that situation, that it's still worth practicing these things, even if you know it's not going to be fruitful?
98% of the time, yes. I mean, I only say 2% of the time no, because I'm sure there's an example I can't think of. But, almost all of the time, it's good to ask your boss about what their goals or objectives are. A second question that you can ask the boss, and, part of your experience might be, and again, this does take bravery, is to say, hey, Chris, I wanted to chat with you for a few minutes. I'd love to work on improving our relationship. I'm not saying it's bad, but I think it could be better. And so there's a few things that I'd like to know about things that I can do differently in order to be more effective. In time, if you're interested in hearing from me some things that I think that you could be doing a little bit differently to be more effective, I'm happy to share them. But, let's engage in this particular type of conversation so we can make great progress. That won't happen unless you do two things. One, find the time to say it, and then to say it, right? You have to say to the person, I think we could have a better relationship than we have today. and let's work on it. If you're having a bad relationship with your boss knows it. I mean, they know that they have challenging relationships with people, et cetera. So hopefully they would be open to engaging you in that type of conversation.
Yeah. And I know in a coffee shop environment specifically, it's really easy to see what kind of rapport you have with your boss, because if you happen to work with them, the pressure of the situation itself, live serving people day in and day out, can, accentuate what's already there. So yeah, agreed. Everyone kind of knows where we stand, but we just kind of put up with it. And I started off talking about this, saying like we do kind of write ourselves out of the equation when it comes to, what we can do, that learned helplessness. And some part of me thinks that it's a lack of self-awareness that leads to blame shifting and putting it in other people's courts. And that's one of the things that you talked about was self-awareness. And as we're talking about approaching our boss and saying, hey, I'd like to work on our relationship, it sounds kind of alien, to be honest. Like something that I don't think I would say to my boss of my own accord, because I think, well, they're the one. But it's pretty vulnerable to say something like that. But it does take a little bit of self-awareness. How do you define self-awareness, and how specifically does the lack of this hurt our chances at advancing or just getting better careers?
I think self-awareness plays a significant role in your ability to be successful in almost all of the one-on-one coaching engagements that I do. My number one goal is to help my client build their self-awareness so they can self-manage more effectively. I can't tell them what to do. As a leadership coach or an external consultant, I don't have the influence or ability to tell them what to do. I can give them advice. I can tell them how I'm experiencing them in the moment. I can share examples of what I've observed, right? I can do all of that, and it needs to resonate with them in ways, right, that they're curious in respect to building their self-awareness. So self-awareness plays a huge role in helping people self-manage more effectively. If you work for a boss who has very high self-awareness, I guarantee you're in a better position to go in and say, hey, I wanted to work on building our relationship a little bit better than it is today. Are you open to hearing that? The likelihood of them saying yes is high. If you work for a boss who has very low self-awareness, and we all have worked for them, you're probably not going to do that, because the likelihood of them saying sounds great is low. They're going to say, no, that's a waste of time. Get back to work, right? So, it's just not going to ever be of interest to them. So that might be a great place, Chris, for people to start or to think about, which is, where is my boss's degree of self-awareness? Are they very knowledgeable on their strengths and areas of opportunity, or are they blind to them? And if they're blind to them, your likelihood of making success in that relationship, I think, is marginalized.
Yeah, as it would be for us too if we're blind. And, I was thinking about the fact that we have some degree of self-knowledge when it comes to things that are extreme or not avoidable, when things are wrong usually. We are not very good at actually doing a lot with self-awareness once we get it. What are we trying to be aware of? Because there's lots of aspects of ourself that shows up to work. So within that, like, what are specifically the most helpful areas to be aware of when we pursue self-awareness at work? And then how do we actually put that into action without just collecting a nice, volume of knowledge that doesn't really do us any good?
Well, one classic model would say that self-awareness will fall into one or two buckets. We all have natural strengths, and these are things that, for whatever reason, based on either our DNA or perhaps training that we've received, that we're really good at, and we're just good at it naturally. And then there are other things that we're not good at, and it's either because it's not of interest to us, we've never been trained how to do it, it's not in our DNA. No matter how many times I try to do it, I'm just never going to be good at it. Everyone fits into that particular model, whether you're the president or a supervisor. And so being knowledgeable on what your strengths are and the things that you're naturally good at or have been trained to be good at, and your areas of opportunity, are important. You may agree or disagree or like or not like the answer, but your ability to acknowledge and say, hey, what are you really good at? and what are some areas of opportunity for you or things that you're not good at that you hire other people to do are critical. Great leaders like Bill Gates, for example, has almost always had a coach, and he also hires people to do the things that he's not good at. So he potentially, I've never met Bill Gates, but from what I've read, has a decent sense of self-awareness, and he knows things that he's not good at, and he acknowledges them and hires people to do them so that they still get done.
That makes sense. So if you are a middle manager and you might not have the ability to hire somebody, or if you're just, you're a staff member, you don't have the ability to delegate something, how do you use the knowledge of what you're really good at and not good at in that equation?
Well, a lot of organizations do what's called a 360, which is an assessment where you collect feedback from bosses, peers, and subordinates on how they experience you in the workplace. It's not an evaluation, but it allows those people to say, here's how I experience Chris in the workplace in good ways, and here's some things that I think he could be doing differently in order to be more effective. If I can collect that type of data, I can then create what I call a leadership development template, which I utilize to identify 2 or 3 areas that I want to work on. Maybe it's delegation, maybe it's communication, maybe it's relationship building, whatever it might be, and it's different for everybody. Identify those areas, and then identify 2 or 3, not many, visible actions that I can do in order to make progress. If somebody is doing this at home and on their own, the internet, of course, is a fantastic place to look up information on how to be a better delegator, how to be a better communicator, how to be a better person at building relationships, etc. You can also hire big companies to come in and do this as well. But, you do need to know first what these areas are that influence how others experience you, and then commit to doing not many, but 2 or 3 things a little bit differently in order to have a different outcome. That is utilizing self-awareness to self-manage the experiences that you're having.
So even if you don't have the ability to, collect data from your boss about you, like your boss is one of those that doesn't communicate, would you say that the feedback you can glean from your coworkers is somewhat similar to what you might expect to hear from your boss? Or, is there a big gap between stuff you hear from people that work with you versus those who you work for?
So there could be a gap because oftentimes people behave in different ways with different people. So if you watch a senior leader in your organization who, for example, might be tyrannical in respect to meetings that you participate in, and then you happen to be at a board of directors meeting where they're not in charge of the meeting, but now they're one of the sideline participants, I guarantee you're going to see 2 different people, right? They're just not behaving the same way. They're not interacting with people the same way. I still believe that all feedback is meaningful. So I have done 360s professionally with organizations, and amazingly, the boss didn't participate. It's still a head scratcher why the boss would not participate when I've been hired to come in and do this work, but for whatever reason. But, every client I've worked with still gets enough feedback from people. And, the second thing I would tell you, Chris, on this topic is, and this is also a chapter in the book, no one knows you as well as you. So most people are not surprised significantly by the feedback that they get in a 360. There might be 1 or 2 things that are surprising, or the group that it's coming from might be surprising, but, and I always ask people that question, gee, you had a chance to look at your 360. What surprised you? What did you read that you didn't expect to read? Or what did you read that you knew would be there? And, you're not surprised, right? But, most people know themselves fairly well. They know what they're good at. They know what they have challenges with. They may or may not admit it, but they're not terribly surprised by a lot of the content that they read.
There's a pride issue with self-awareness, I find. I think with anybody who even reads a lot of books about the subject and understands, I need to work on these things, and I keep being told this is something that I'm, always need to work on, but they don't. And part of it, maybe it's this pride, or just an inability to start making the first step because you don't want to admit that you need help in that area. I mean, I imagine there is a certain level of humility that's needed to actually let self-awareness be an effective tool.
Well, I love that you've mentioned this, Chris, because I will tell you the number one transition a person needs to experience is to go from information they're hearing to action. And I have worked with a number of clients, and in our conversations, when they've collected some feedback, I'll say, gee, have you heard this before? Is this something that you've experienced before? And, they'll say, oh my gosh, yeah, I'll go all the way back to high school. I've always been this way. And for whatever reason, they've not done something about it. And, it could be pride, it could be complexity, it could be arrogance, it could be triviality. They just make it like a small thing and not worry about it. Whatever it might be. But the number one challenge leaders face today is to take information that they're hearing from others on how they experience them and transition it into action. Most people don't. And they've heard the feedback, they're aware of the feedback, but they just don't always do something about it.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to the idea of you have to be open to change, right? And things are changing around you all the time, and we don't need to be reminded of that today, especially. But sometimes this goes into the curiosity chapter a little bit, for me at least, where if I'm curious about myself, I at least am holding myself with an open hand that says there are these things about me or that I'm going to discover, and I'm almost tacitly agreeing to do something about it once I discover them. Just as I would be curious about something else in the world. I mean, curiosity seems to be a precursor for, actionable discovery. For you, how does curiosity kind of factor into all this in terms of creating a better career where you are and then, where you want to go?
There are two things that came up when I was thinking about curiosity in the experiences that my clients were having. One is that for some reason, which I don't know why, in corporate America, and I believe this would be true in any country in the globe, the higher your level in an organization, the less curious people expect you to be because you got there because you know more, right? So a president of a company has all the answers and doesn't need to be curious, well, as someone who is just starting at a supervisor level at a company needs to be very curious, right, to understand what's happening. I'm not saying that's true, but that's just the mindset that people have, that the higher you are in an organization, the less curiosity you probably have. The second experience, and this comes from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is habit number 5, which I believe if most people did more of in organizations, we would experience a much different world. And habit number 5 is seek first to understand, then be understood. And too often we go into meetings, conversations, ready to go with our perspective and our opinion. And my number one goal is to convince you I'm right. And it's so hard to prevail in that type of experience because I don't know why you think the way you think. So a better place to start is to first pick your brain on what you're thinking, why you're thinking it, where does it come from, all those types of perspectives, so I can be better positioned to now share with you what I'm thinking, or I might even change what I'm thinking a little bit now that I know more about your perspective. So this idea of, seek first to understand, be curious with others about what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, where it comes from, before you start sharing your perspective is a really powerful tool for leaders who want to build relationships and really influence people in positive ways.
That's really interesting because it slows you down too. If you're curious, you wouldn't be as hasty.
You wouldn't be as hasty, and it's hard to do. So I will tell you, the 9 chapters, none of them are easy. These are not things you just say, "Oh, a great idea! I'm going to start doing it on Monday." We've grown up in a culture, junior high school, college, graduate school, where we were expected to have all the answers. The history professor walked into history class one day and said, "Okay, who's the 5th president of the United States?" he expected every hand to go up and everyone to know the answer, right? We were always expected to know the answer. And then we get jobs and we can't know all the answers because we don't have professors who are teaching us, right? So we have to find out the answers on our own. And that's where curiosity becomes such a powerful tool. But oftentimes, and I'm sure your listeners have seen this as well, people are asked questions. Clearly, they don't know the answer, but they pretend or dance or act like they know the answer. And it's obvious to everyone, but they still do it anyway. Instead of saying, you know what, that's a really good question. I think most of you would probably think I should know the answer to that, but I don't. So let me find out the answer to that, and I'll get back to everybody by 4 o'clock tomorrow.
Right. It's huge.
You get back to them by 4 o'clock, and I guarantee you they'll move on and say, wow, that was fantastic. Great job.
So kind of disarming the normal response, which is the test-taking response, like I'm going to fail if I don't say something that's a good answer. So I'm just going to throw a Hail Mary, hope it lands, and then I'll look it up on Google when I go back to the the bar or the cubicle or whatever. That's an environmental thing that it's like a culture of fear that's almost inherited in professional settings when there's that power differential between the staff member and the leader. You always want to make your boss happy. And I think a lot of people could look at that first thing we talked about, like have a positive relationship with your boss means always, not being the squeaky wheel, not being the one to, if you're asking all these questions or you don't know the answers, you have this fear that it's going to be you on the chopping block next because we need competent people that we can trust in. And you seem to ask a lot of questions. And I mean, how do we get over that fear that, balancing curiosity with self-survival or with survival?
When I think about the answer to that question, I think it is cultural in respect to how people behave and act, not to get political, but in my observation of presidents of the United States, Barack Obama was the first U.S. president that I could ever remember who got up in front of a group of people and when asked about something that didn't go well, admitted it and said, you know what, I don't think that went as well as it should have. We're going to do better next time. Most people before him and certainly people after him never would say that because they never made mistakes and everything always went perfectly. I loved your metaphor of, kind of feeling like it's a failure type experience that either you pass or fail, right? And if I don't have the answer or can't answer it well, they're going to fail me. And that's a problem. And in reality, people aren't doing pass or fail. They're doing trust or lack of trust. And you're more likely to trust a leader who says, that's a really great question. I don't have the answer. I probably should have the answer. So let me get that for you and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. That type of leader is going to build much better relationships than someone who doesn't answer the question. I've always loved presidential debates, if you watch them on TV, because it's so comical because people are asked a question and they don't answer the question.
Yep.
They say, well, let me first respond to what was said a few minutes ago, or, that's a really good question, but, something else I want to talk about, and they don't answer the question. And, you don't build trust that way, right? You want someone to say, great question, let me answer it. And if I have a couple of minutes near the end, I want to go back to what someone had said a couple of minutes ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I love that trust aspect where there is a bit of guilty before being proven innocent when it comes to bosses. You're already kind of in the crosshairs of the employees, and so you almost need to sort of apologize for all bad bosses in the world preemptively and
right.
build back that trust that you never technically lost yourself, but you inherited. And I can see where some bosses might say, and I've seen lots of leaders like this, and I've done, talked to some clients about this too. Curiosity can turn toxic, it seems, if we conflate it with suspicion or paranoia, or just kind of I'm getting to the bottom of things, but in a way that is almost like an inquisition.
Well, I always tell people, and I think, Chris, that there are different types of curiosity. So if it's clear that I disagree with you and I'm asking questions that are attempting to uncover what it is you're saying, I don't think I'm going to enjoy that experience. In working with clients, I tend to tell people, I love curiosity because I don't have to know anything. I'm just going to ask questions that are like layers of an onion, have you continue to unfold until we get down to potentially the core item that's driving you. And so it might be questions like, why do you feel that way? What makes you think that? What examples do you have that you can share with me? What are the risks of doing what you're describing? What are the risks of not doing what you're describing, right? These are all just very general questions, but my goal isn't to have the answer. My goal is to be curious. And so I want to know why you think the way that you think, where this idea comes from, why you think this is a great idea. What other ideas have you thought about that might be competitive with this, right? I mean, these are all what I consider to be basic, non-confrontational type questions that help us get to better answers.
Yeah. I like that you're, again, going back to that, the fifth habit of seek to understand and then to be understood. I've been on the receiving end where I know that they disagree with me and they have an answer in their head, but they're still asking me questions as if they're being curious in a perfunctory sort of way. And it really is like dripping with acting and posturing, and it makes me angry.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are some people who are not good at this. And I'm not suggesting, and the book doesn't suggest, that this is acting, right? I'm not suggesting, hey, pretend to be curious while you're really trying to get them to, go your direction, right? But, clearly there are people, and this is that small percentage of leaders who are bad at this stuff and are not good at behaving in ways that can help build relationships effectively.
Well, I know you didn't write these in a particular order, but self-awareness does seem to feed into this in that you can kind of practice on yourself in the off season, so to speak, like before you get into the office or whatever. And if you're not curious about yourself and just everyday things, it's hard to like switch into curiosity once you get to work.
It can be. And, I would tell, again, for listeners who either don't work for companies who would do this for them, which is perform a 360 or, collect feedback, you can do this with others, right? You could reach out to 5 of your friends and say, hey, I'm looking to build my leadership style at work. I'm curious if you could share with me, what words or phrases do you think of when you think of me, right? And, hopefully the people you're asking to speak to are good friends, right, who will share with you what they think of when they think of you. That's just one way that you can collect some of this feedback as a starting point to building your self-awareness and how others experience you.
One of the things in the book that you talk about is bell curves. And I bring this up now because as we're talking about strategy and bettering ourselves and sort of aiming for these higher levels of, existence as employees and bosses, the performance mind starts to become just kind of like, we got to go after it. We got to get it. You're not always going to get it. You're not always going to succeed. And people aren't always going to receive what you do well. In some people might. And that's kind of the epitome of a bell curve is it's a spectrum of different outcomes. How do you see bell curves being an instrumental part of our perspective in our careers?
This came out of a number of conversations that I had with clients who were so focused on selling an idea that they never spent any time on the opposite end, being prepared to answer challenging questions from people who might not be fans of the idea, of other ideas that might be competitive with their idea, right? So in some ways they were naive or were so focused why what they were thinking or wanted to do was such a great idea that they weren't prepared to handle challenges. And unfortunately, those challenges often delayed making progress because we now had to go back and think about it, right? So the bell curve is more of a representation that on one end, of course, are all the reasons that you believe that this is a great idea. But on the other end of the bell curve are being as prepared and even have people ask you the questions in advance of, why did you choose this idea? What are some other ideas that you could have chosen? What would you do differently if you couldn't do this idea, right? These are all questions that people could ask that could delay you because you haven't prepared those answers. right? So it's really getting balance, Chris, between what you want to do and then all of the obstacles that might be in place so that you can keep moving forward in advance of whatever it is that you want to talk about with others.
So you're preparing yourself for rejection, but also for acceptance. And I mean, that's a very mature thing to ask of a person, especially in the moment where they may be experiencing a lot of stress and pressure to, again, perform. But like that, a lot of people, even with positive things, might be undergoing an amygdala hijack, Like if this positive thing that I want to affect doesn't work, then my career is over. How do we really live into the present in a way that makes us resilient? Another thing you talk about in the book, to this type of feedback to our ideas, so that we can view things less as impending doom and more like these are just this is feedback and it's just part of a bigger picture.
Well, I believe, and in the client work that I have done, Chris, it wasn't so much that I didn't have an answer to something. And, in times where I've seen people not have an answer at actual meetings, I think they do have an amygdala hijack and just don't handle it well in respect to the response. But it's not that you didn't have an answer. It's that you never thought about the possibility of being asked that question. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. So this isn't creative in respect to asking people to do something that is beyond their capabilities. It's, hey, in preparation for the session that we're doing in 2 weeks, I know you're going to spend a lot of time telling people why the idea that you have is fantastic. Let's also go through an exercise of picking apart how people who don't like the idea might ask questions or what their concerns might be, so we're better prepared. So when they ask that hard question, like, how can we afford this? What else have you thought about? You have an answer. And you can say, absolutely, thank you so much for that question. There are 3 other things that we thought about in respect to this. This is why we chose this direction and didn't choose those 3. That's a better experience than saying, oh, I hadn't thought about any other ideas. I was so focused on this one.
Or yeah, good point. And maybe you haven't thought about other ideas too, because you don't care about what they think because you think they're stupid, just I have these ideas because I have to, because no one else will, because I'm the smartest one. And, putting yourself in the position of thinking about pushback feels like lowering yourself in a sense.
Well, this is a great point as it pertains to where the title Drive Your Career for the book comes from. Passengers will only think about the idea that they have and be totally caught up with what I'm suggesting is fantastic and how we're all going to benefit, etc. People who are more drivers of their career are going to consider the other avenues that people might go down and be prepared to answer those questions so that they can move forward. The goal isn't just to be prepared to answer those questions. The goal is to continue to move forward and make progress. And you will only be able to do that if you recognize that there are 2 perspectives that people might have, people who love it, people who are going to hate it. And I need to be able to treat with respect the people who hate it and answer those questions effectively.
Respect. That's great. Yeah. Whether you agree or not.
Whether you agree or not.
I mean, as we wrap up here, I think it perfectly kind of goes into this idea of empathy that you've mentioned a few times in the conversation. And empathy is, it's like synergy was as a buzzword. I think empathetic, management and all this other stuff is out there, and we like the word. In reality, I mean, it's like you said, it's a lot harder. This book is great. There's 9 things. That's a deception of books, I guess. It makes it look easy. But empathy in particular is a very deep and kind of a soul searching kind of a practice. How do you define empathy in the professional setting? I know we talked about just respect of other people's perspectives, but is there more to it than that?
Well, it is a complex topic. I acknowledge that. To me, the definition of empathy is meeting somebody where they are. And I believe, Chris, that this is the number one underutilized leadership skill across the globe, which is interacting with others in a way where you meet where they are and not expect them to come to where you are. And, empathy is in its infancy in organizations around the globe. I'm sure most organizations still consider it to be a soft, a tree hugging type experience and not fitting for corporate environments. But I will tell you that leaders who are empathetic are much more likely to build more effective relationships and help move people in an effective direction than leaders who don't show empathy at all. So to me, it's about meeting people where they are. It's about being observant of your colleagues. And when you notice, which is the first step of empathy, is to notice if somebody is a little different than they normally are for a variety of reasons, and stepping into it and going to where they are to see how you can help, again, is an extremely effective leadership tool.
Okay, so meeting them where they are, but not necessarily doing that just to stay there.
No, the goal is to help them in ways that you can, and you may not be the right person, but you want to let them know that you're there for them if they need to vent, if they have a personal issue that they didn't feel they could talk about at work, whatever it might be. It's, how can I help you make progress on what it is what you are experiencing? And I will tell you, you don't have to agree that the issue they're experiencing is problematic. Some people can have something happen to them that to the rest of us seems incredibly trivial, but for whatever reason, for them, it's devastating, right? So, I need to let them know that, hey, this appears to be devastating for you. I'm really sorry that this happened. What can I do to help? Right? That is demonstrating empathy, because now they believe that there is a road they can get on that will help them make progress, as opposed to working in a place where nobody understands what I'm going through.
With empathy, meeting people where they are and kind of having what I think the Arbinger Institute calls like that outward mindset, and it's not just about you. How do we balance that with ambition that I think would drive people to want to, buy this book? We want to get better in our careers, but empathy is like curiosity. It's a slowing down. It's an understanding. How would you suggest we view both of those things in balance?
Well, I think leaders who want to build their self-awareness, and that is not all leaders, but leaders who want to build their self-awareness, perhaps would purchase the book to gain some insight into some ways. And I know not all 9 ideas are going to fit all people all the time. So there may be 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that really resonate with you. But, these are experiences and observations that many people have. So I believe people will relate to the 3 or 4 that they identify with to help them become a more effective leader. I have coached people specifically to help them build their empathy skills. These are very challenging relationships, because this isn't as simple as saying, oh, be more empathetic. Okay, right? So, it requires the first step, of course, of observing. And for some people, they have blinders on. They do not even observe other people in the workplace because it's work, and it's not my role to be friends and colleagues with people. We're doing work and we come in, do the work, and go home. So, starting at that step is a great place to start, but it's a very challenging experience for others. I hope the chapter inspires people to reflect a little bit on building empathy skills, building curiosity skills, building listening skills, so they take the first step in the journey to get a little bit better at it.
Yeah, well said. And I think there's so much in this book that, dives deep into all of these things, far deeper than we can, obviously, in this show. But where can we go to learn more about what you do and also to buy the book?
Folks can go to excellius.com. That's EXCELLIUS.com. And there's information about my practice as well as the 2 books that I've authored are there. So you can purchase them anywhere online, but the website will connect you if you're interested. And, we should do a virtual coffee cup connect here.
Oh, yeah.
In appreciation of our conversation today.
Oh, I'm up for it for sure. Thank you so much, Ed. Really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks, Chris. We had a great conversation. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode and that it really made you think and made you curious about how you can take more control over your career and how it progresses. I mentioned at the start of this episode that it's a conversation I have with baristas all the time in terms of how to take advantage of where you are right now and be a little bit more mindful and present in the moment and take responsibility for where you are and where you want to go. As someone who's been in the industry for 21 years, it really is something that you look back on and think, boy, I could have done, a little bit more here or there. And I want for you to have fewer regrets than those of us who have more of those thoughts as we get into our older, grayer coffee years. A huge thank you to Ed Evarts for joining us on the show and sharing so many great insights to help us on this path to a better career. Thank you so much, Ed. Now, if you want more information about this book and all of the things that Ed is up to over at Excellius, you can go to the website excellius.com. That's EXCELLIUS.com. And I definitely encourage you to get this book, Drive Your Career, and listen to his podcast, Be Brave at Work. So if you have any questions or comments on this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, feel free to reach out via email. My email address is chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also the email to use if you're wanting to work with Keys to the Shop Consulting. Again, that is chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, one of the ways that we drive our careers is by learning. And learning comes from being able to reach out to others and hear their experiences and their stories, let them give you their insights based on all that they've gone through in the industry. And one of the great places you can find that kind of information is at a place called Coffee Fest. Coffee Fest happens 4 times a year. We're back into in-person shows in 2021. We just went to San Antonio. In a couple days from this episode's airing, it's going to be Coffee Fest Atlanta. But after that, in August, there'll be Coffee Fest at Anaheim in California, and then Portland in November, Portland, Oregon. Now, Coffee Fest has a history of over 25 years of being the number one place to go if you want to thrive as a coffee entrepreneur, as a coffee retailer. There's amazing free lectures every day. I'll be one of the presenters on each day of all the Coffee Fests. There are very accessibly priced workshops and trainings. There is, of course, the trade show floor, and then there's the community on top of that, and the competitions that take place at Coffee Fest, like the cold brew competition and latte art competition. So a lot going on at Coffee Fest, and I hope to see you there. Just go to coffeefest.com to look up the show that you want to go to, see what's going on, and register today. Again, hope to see you there. Check them out over at coffeefest.com. And with that is the end of our episode today. Thanks everyone for taking the time to listen. I appreciate you all supporting the show. Don't forget to subscribe, share these episodes with a friend, rate and review the show. Have an amazing day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.